When you think about an e-commerce player or a retail player, there's more flexibility in being able to do that. You can probably go out and find a vendor that makes a similar product in another country and begin to source some of that product there, right? For manufacturers, and many of our customers are manufacturers as well as retailers, e-commerce, all different types. It's more challenging, right? Because you're creating a product somewhere with a vendor and moving that sourcing of that product somewhere else can be a big expense.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Sustainable Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Jim. Jim, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here with you today. So my name's Jim McCullen. I'm CTO at Century Supply Chain Solutions. We're a global logistics provider focused on a service called Origin Cargo Management, which hopefully we'll get to talk about a little bit later in the podcast. Located in Charlottesville, Virginia, just recently moved out here from Richmond, so a new area of focus for me. I've been in supply chain space for over 30 years now, driving supply chain technology.
Okay, and what's been your route to CTO of Century, Jim?
I started with Century over 3 decades ago and really started as their sole IT person right out of the gates, was sent all over Asia to begin to build out technologies to help customers understand what was happening in their supply chains. If you think back that long ago and things like the internet didn't exist, email was just getting started. And so there were so many challenges in the technical components and aspects of being able to share information across the world. And so got my early start there at Century and just continued with Century and evolved into leading our global IT teams that we have today, located around the world to support our technology and our customers. So yeah, it's been a more or less a lifetime evolution for me in supply chain and at Century.
Cool. And what do you think has surprised you most in the last 30 years of your work at Century?
Yeah, so I'd say it's a couple of things. One, that in supply chain and global logistics, some of the things that have taken so long to change, problems that we faced years and years ago that have come again under new names or different focuses, but the same concepts. But when I think about the technology and all of the advances that we've made, that technology has made over the past 30 years, it was so much more of an effort to be able to exchange data, to be able to talk both electronically through data and in real terms with people around the world, right? And when you think about today, you can jump on a Teams call or a Zoom call with anyone in the world, and you can even have, it convert to local language in real time as the conversations are taking place. When I started, I had to have a translator over my shoulder talking to the teams that were doing the work in the system and translating back and forth. And today we have so much better communication. The technologies are there to support everything that we need to do in the supply chain. So yeah, it's been a really fun journey to watch all of this materialize over the years.
You've been at Century, you said, over 3 decades. That's quite rare in tech and logistics. What's kept you there so long?
There's always a new challenge in supply chain. So, when you think about every new customer that we onboard, they have unique supply chain requirements that, yes, we've seen collectively across customers, but everyone is special and unique in their way and how they manage and orchestrate their supply chain. In a lot of jobs, I think you get to a point where it's like, okay, you've learned everything. There's really nothing new here. I need to go find something else to do. At Century, that's never been the case because there's always been something growing or changing, whether that's, new customers, new verticals that we're approaching, onboarding new origins around the world. So when you think about the expansion over the last 30 years from, where we were hyper focused on just China to start with in Hong Kong, and then that expansion across Asia, across Europe and other countries around the world, that's always brought on new challenges. And then I think for me, a good friend of mine once said, we were talking about why we're in supply chain and been here for so long. And in some ways, it's about being able to take chaos and turn it into calm, right? So there's always some level of chaos that you're dealing with. And for me, that's the challenge that's kept me excited and engaged about it is there's always something new to work towards, to solve. And then when you look at the technology aspect of it, we're finally at a time now where we're seeing the technology that's truly capable of replacing what people have had to do in the global logistics processes, right? Because again, there's so much, adaption and customization to what each account wants. In the past, that was purely done with people. And now these technologies that we're seeing are truly allowing us to do that. So like you would have seen in the news, 5, 7 years ago, these big companies talking about, they're going to digitize supply chain. They're going to change the way supply chain works. And none of that really materialized, right? Now we're really starting to see that materialize because these technologies have honestly caught up to what logistics needed.
Okay. Okay. And you mentioned origin cargo management a little while ago. What is that? Why is it such a big deal? And why is it so popular?
Yeah, so let me kind of give you a little bit of an overview of it because I'm sure some of your listeners are not that familiar with it because it does tend to be focused on the North American region aggressively, and some other regions are more focused on using freight forwarders, using NVOs. And so, I'll start with it, kind of general overview and then dig in and ask me more questions as we go. But
Sure.
so, as an origin cargo manager, the importer hires Century or someone like Century to be their control tower, their gateway between their vendors or manufacturers and their transportation providers. And so we connect with all of their internal systems. We connect with their ERP systems like SAP and Oracle and other tools like that. We connect with their TMSs, their warehouse management systems, and we bring that data into our platform, which is called Visiv. So Visiv is our innovative technology for supply chain management. And then their suppliers around the world are booking inside of our system to be able to transport the product. And we, in turn, our teams around the world, and that's something that's a little bit unique from Century's side, is there's other technology providers out there that offer the technology to deliver these services, but not the people. So we have the supply chain experts located at every origin port around the world. We have the CFSs, container freight stations, set up where goods can be delivered, carton level goods can be delivered and consolidated into ocean containers, which is a big part of what we do.
Hmm.
And so these vendors are interacting with us. We're in turn booking with the transportation providers that the customer, the importer, has selected. And so that's where it's really different, right? As an importer, if you're selecting a freight forwarder or an NVO to be your transportation provider and coordinator, they've got a personal interest or a professional interest in the transportation costs, right? So that's where they're trying to make the most of their money. From Century's side, the importer pays us the same amount no matter what the freight cost is, because we are just their eyes and ears at origin, making sure that vendor is shipping the goods at the right time to the right place, right quantity, at the most efficient cost in transit, right? So we manage all of that for those importers. And again, because we're not the transportation provider, we're always looking for the best interest of the customer, right? So that could be fulfilling their carrier contracts. It could be going after spot rates during a certain time period because the pricing makes more sense for that. It could be looking at carbon footprint and certain percentages of goods that we want to move through a more sustainable path. And so our teams are orchestrating that for our customers around the world. And then our Visiv platform gives them the visibility, the precision visibility to everything that's happening in the supply chain. And when you think about everything that's happening today, whether it's around the tariffs or potential port strikes or vessel ownership or any of those kind of things, understanding and being able to see into your supply chain through our Visit platform and through our data, which we make accessible, gives you that power to be able to plan, to react to situations faster, and to adapt to what's coming next. So it's a little bit different, than the origin cargo management model. We are just there for the benefit of the importer to make sure that the decisions that are being made are in their best interest. And, it's instead of that importer having to have an origin office at every one of those countries to babysit that process for them, right? Our people are there to do that. Does that make sense?
Indeed. Yeah. Yeah. But this is the Sustainable Supply Chain podcast. So how does one connect to the other? How is this more sustainable?
Sure. So, I think from a sustainability standpoint, our customers can come to us again as a central control point to make those decisions, right? So, number one, we can provide, all of the carbon reporting on what it's costing them from a carbon standpoint to move these goods and what routes are more efficient. We have things like EVs at origin where, we can reduce transportation spend when it comes to carbon footprint. So they have this centralized control point where the importer can orchestrate how they want to manage their sustainability effort when it comes to global transportation. So rather than them having to do that individually with each ocean carrier, with each warehouse, with each origin trucking company, right? Like we are that collection point for them to bring all that data together. And then also that decision point where they can come back and begin to kind of set levers as to how they want to manage transport, whether, it's cost, it's carbon footprint, it's transit time. And in some cases, all three of those may come together, right, for the most efficient delivery of goods.
You've got a viewpoint over global supply chains that I'm guessing, seeing as you're all over essentially, what would you say is the most common point of failure you see in global supply chains today?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think it tends to be when we go into kind of crisis situations, right? So when, for example, when we have capacity issues at origin, so there's not enough ocean carrier space for all of the goods that are moving,
Mhm.
and begins to create challenges, especially for customers that don't have somebody like an origin cargo manager in place. Because we have visibility to all of their data, we understand what purchase orders are high priority or not. We can make those decisions in advance. So when that vendor is booking the goods, we can push back on vendor A and say, I'm sorry, your goods are going to have to wait an additional week because the customer needs vendor B or C, right? If those vendors are working directly with the transportation providers, every one of those vendors wants to get their cargo moving as fast as possible, right?
Sure.
That's their concern. From Century's standpoint, our concern is the customer. What product do you need first? So when you're in that capacity crunch at origin, we're able to help with that, right? On the domestic side, it's the same thing. When you get into these situations where, maybe you've got backlogs at a port, maybe you've got some kind of a port strike going on or something like that, having that better visibility to what's inbound, to where it is, gives the importer that control, that power to be able to overcome those situations faster and also to anticipate them, right? So one of the things that our supply chain teams do, we actually have what's called a disruption team. And so before a crisis, not all crises you know about in advance, right? But many of them you do. And so before something like that happens, we bring this team together to really think about what are our customers going to need during this time period. So I'll take the ILA strike that was threatened last year with the longshoremen on the East Coast and Gulf Coasts. So our team got together in advance of that and sat down and really thought through, okay, how have we dealt with these situations in the past? What information are our customers going to be in need of, right? And so potentially you could have vessels stacked up at ports and you need to understand what product is on there and, when did each of those vessels arrive? So I have at least some idea when they're going to come in, right? And what can we share with our customers in advance of that for their planning standpoint? And, we saw customers that were early on diverting cargo, to the West Coast, for example, but then you get bottlenecks at the West Coast because everybody's trying to move product through that area. And so again, we're just trying to anticipate potentially what's going to happen. What are we going to need to be able to give our customers? They can use that data to be able to deal with these situations better. And then afterwards, we'll do a retrospective and come back around to it and say, okay, what went well and what didn't, right? Like, what did we miss out on that customers came to us at the 11th hour asking for and we didn't think about? And so then we kind of put that into a toolbox so that the next time something similar happens, we can open up that toolbox and say, oh, yeah, we use these 4 things. Let's make sure those are dusted off and ready to go and deliver those to the customer. So that evolution of this disruption team has allowed us to really build better products for our offering.
There's obviously a huge difference between having access to data and having insight from that data. So talk me through there how you see that breaking out in terms of your customers getting insights versus just being flooded with data.
So there's, I think, a couple of things going on there. One is that the data analysis tools have gotten so much better and so much easier to use. And, what I'm seeing today is that many large importers, they have their own data analysis team. They have data storage technologies, data warehouse technologies, other things like that. And so, like, for example, we use a technology called Snowflake at Century to manage our data warehouse. And what that allows us to do is deliver reporting, analytics, dashboards to our customers through our Visive platform. But it also allows us to expose that data to our customers to be able to access directly so that their teams can analyze it. So to come back to your question, there's really 2 sides to it, right? One, and really a couple. The first is you have to have trusted data, right? So you've got to have information that you know is right, that you can trust. The second is we have teams across Century at the various origins, at destination, control tower type teams that understand each of our customers' needs, and they are working with their information to make recommendations, suggestions. So those could be things like looking at longer term plans, like how much of your freight are you having the vendors deliver as factory loaded containers to the port versus consolidated freight coming through our facilities, right? And is there a way to offset maybe some of your inventory carrying costs by adjusting that blend? So our teams will look at that, analyze that, present that to our customers. Same thing when you think about hub programs, for like franchisee divisions and things like that. We'll go through that analysis, take all of the customers' data, analyze it, and then present recommendations to them on what they could do. And when you think about like these hub programs, they could really run from many, many different ports across the world, primarily in Asia. And so really doing that analysis to understand where's the best cost benefit, the best value, we'll present that information to the customers in that format. So yeah, our teams, I think the key is that our teams understand our customers' supply chains really well. They understand their data, and then we can do that analysis. And then at the same time, making that data available to our customers directly so that they can do their own analysis as well. So it's that combination.
Okay. You've managed to carefully avoid using the term AI, even though it's the kind of hot topic du jour across all technology, not just supply chain. So is it that you've got no AI whatsoever in Visive, or are you just being coy?
Yeah, so I guess I wanted to have you start that conversation before we went down there, right? So not go right out of the gates there. So yeah, absolutely. As I kind of alluded to earlier, the technology shift that we're seeing today is because of AI, right? And so I think we're finally at this point where the AI capabilities that are out there allow us to analyze data so much faster, to make decisions through the technology, and really replace what operators have had to do in the past. And so, from Century's perspective, at TPM, the Trans Pacific Marine Conference in Long Beach, a few weeks ago, we were presenting our latest features in our Visit platform. And a couple of those included our new AI routing and consolidation engine. And so when you think about, our customers will ship anywhere from thousands of containers to hundreds of thousands of containers a year. And, our operations teams are coordinating all of that. And when you think about, you've got carrier contracts, you've got carrier allocations, you've got transit times, all of the freight costs, right? You've got all these different components that you need to think about when you're going to book a shipment. And so the routing engine that we've built takes all of that information in and allows us to set levers at a customer level to determine what they're focused on and drive the decision making on how we're going to route that freight through this AI engine. So the operators are able to take all those vendor bookings that are coming in, feed them to these AI agents. They analyze all the data within seconds and then come back with all the possible routings and the preferred routing to take, right? And then same on the consolidation planning. That's the second piece of it. And what we're doing there is looking at all of the bookings that are coming in from the vendors and determining, is there a better consolidation plan here? So you might have 10 vendors bringing product in, and 3 of them are shipping light loaded 40-foot containers, right? And a couple are delivering into a CFS. Well, we can analyze all of that data in advance and go back to the customer and say, hey, we're going to suggest that this vendor deliver these goods to the CFS because you're going to end up getting a better utilized container outbound from there, right? Yes, there's some more costs to bring it through the warehouse at origin, but you've reduced your costs on your transport spend and on your inland spend, which can be a big piece of that cost, right? The inland dray, the DC receiving costs, all of that comes into play. So for us, those 2 tools, and we just announced them basically at TPM, and we will be rolling them out in the next couple of months with our customers. Those 2 tools alone, I think, will dramatically change how we operate as a business. And I think for me, that's the key, is that we're finally at a place in logistics. Like I said earlier, there was so much talk about digitization of supply chain and everything else in the past 5 years or so. And now we're at this place where we truly can do it, and we can replace what these operators are doing with the technology. The other one that we're bringing out is a new chatbot we're calling Robolytics that allows you to talk to your supply chain data. We have all different types of analytics, reporting, data access, screens that you can look at things. But a lot of times you just want to ask a question, right? Like, how many
Mm.
containers do I have coming in to Long Beach in the next 2 weeks that have this product on it? Those kind of questions, right? Or if something happens in the supply chain, like, a vessel hits a bridge or whatever, you can go in and pull that up and say, did I have any freight on this vessel, and have it come back? And yes, you could go through a report and find that, but being able to just ask it the question is the real power, right? And so that's a combination of all of the work that we've done to build out this data warehouse through Snowflake, but also the chatbot capabilities of generative AI and being able to layer those on top. And when you think about global logistics and supply chain, there's so much terminology that's unique to our
Mm.
space. Right? So part of it is we have to teach the chatbot what you're asking and what that relates to, right? Because everybody's got slightly different terms that they use for a lot of these words. That's the piece that we're working on, is enhancing that so that no matter how you phrase your question about your supply chain, the chatbot can figure it out and respond with the right data.
We're seeing, Jim, the rise now of tariffs rearing their ugly head again, and with trade policies shifting. What are smart companies doing now to prepare?
There's some longer term things that folks have been doing, in essence, in preparation for this. And there's some short term things that people are attacking as well. The longer term side of it is being able to distribute the risk of your supply chain, right? So being able to expand where you're sourcing product from. And when you think about an e-commerce player or a retail player, there's more flexibility in being able to do that. You can probably go out and find a vendor that makes a similar product in another country and begin to source some of that product there, right? For manufacturers, and many of our customers are manufacturers as well as retailers, e-commerce, all different types, it's more challenging, right? Because you're creating a product somewhere with a vendor, and moving that sourcing of that product somewhere else can be a big expense. But that's what we've seen, over the last few years. And some of that has just been to expand the sourcing options, the countries that people are buying product from, so that they're not so isolated in just one country. And so that's been going on. That's helped right now, because as these tariffs materialize, if you've got a distributed sourcing plan, you've got some ability to move things around in where your purchasing is taking place. You may not be able to do that overnight, but you may be able to make some of those adjustments. So that's one of the things on the longer term side. On the shorter term side, things that we're seeing folks really focusing in on again now, and it's just something that origin cargo management providers like Century can really help with, are reducing the dutiable cost of the goods. And so a lot of cases, the Incoterms that people will buy goods from tend to be like FOB, right? So that the importer is buying the goods and paying for the transportation from the vessel forward, right? But the vendor is paying for that initial transportation to get the goods to the port. And so in many cases, that cost could be factored into your first cost. And in turn, you're going to pay duty on that. So being able to isolate that, and there's a couple of ways to do that. One is to take over the origin trucking and manage that from the vendor's door. Or the other is to have better visibility to those costs. And so through our Visive technology, we can collect the front end transportation costs, and then they can be reduced from that dutiable cost to reduce that exposure. So, that's one thing that we're seeing. We've seen, we've got customers that'll look at different freight terms. So, for example, DDP, where the vendor is landing the goods on behalf of the customer, that changes the negotiating position for the customer of who's responsible for paying those duties, right? And really kind of forces it back on the vendor to be able to renegotiate the price points. We've seen customers for sure going in back to vendors to have them reduce their cost for that product to offset some of the tariffs. But where the tariffs are headed right now, you're not going to get that much cost back out of it, right? We've also seen customers both accelerating and decelerating orders. And so we've seen, some orders getting pulled back as importers are, not sure of the economic situation that we're going to be addressing in the future, and whether the consumer demand is going to continue at a stable level or decline. We've seen some customers that are pulling back on some of those orders. We've seen others that have greatly accelerated their orders to get as much product in country as they can before this materializes, right? So definitely playing both sides of it there. It's really interesting too, when you think about it from the consumer perspective. The consumer could go in two directions as well, right? On one side of it could pull back and say, okay, I'm not spending money on any big ticket items or anything else because I'm not sure of the economy and I want to save my money right now. Or they could look at it from the standpoint of, well, if these tariffs are going to happen, the cost of these goods are going to go up. And especially for larger purchases, I mean, I better make this purchase now. Right. And so, like, in my mind, I'm a big mountain biker, right? And mountain bikes can get pretty expensive. So, if there's a 25% increase in price on mountain bikes, I think I need to talk to my wife about getting another mountain now instead of later. Right. So yeah, so there's those dynamics going on. And I think the importers are all negotiating or thinking through that right now. Like, what is that impact going to be? Do I want to have more product here at a lower cost ready to sell, or do I want to keep my inventory levels in more control so that if consumer demand does decline, I'm not impacted as much, right? So yeah, to come back to your original question, diversifying their sourcing, critically important. Having a player like Century in place, critically important, because the more origins that you're sourcing from and the more distributed your product sourcing is, the more complex it is, right? And the
Yeah.
more you need to rely on somebody like Century to be at each of those origin ports on your behalf, especially if you're going to start sourcing from new regions that you haven't been in before, right? Like,
Mm.
we know it, we understand it. But if you're doing it on your own and just hoping that that NVO or freight forwarder is going to really be there for your best interest, that could be a challenge, right? So having us in place to orchestrate it empowers the importer to be able to make those decisions.
And what about trust? And when I'm talking about trust now, I'm talking about trust in AI systems because they famously hallucinate. So, how do you make sure that your customers trust your systems to get the answers right?
It's a great question. From Century's perspective, what we're doing is really using the AI systems to empower, enable our operations teams. So at this stage, the AI systems aren't making this decision to route the cargo. I think we will get there where it's like, okay, in 80% of these routings, we don't need a human to touch it at all, right? But where we are right now is we can at least use these technologies to present to the operations teams, hey, we believe this is the best option for you to route this cargo. And here's three other alternatives, and let them decide, make that final decision, and then give us some feedback in the platform to be able to say, why did they make that decision? Or why didn't they choose what the AI engine chose, right? So then we get this level of trust with it over time where we can then start to say, okay, you know what, in these scenarios, there hasn't been a challenge, right? Let's let the AI engine pick those. On the chatbot side of it, same thing there. We were analyzing every question that our customers are asking, and right now we're internally running it, and we're just starting on beta with our customers to start using it, so that we can understand, like, what did the customer ask, what did it give back, and was that correct, right? So that in most cases it's an interpretation of the language more so than the data itself. In both those cases, we're going at it conservatively and using it to power up our people rather than replace our people, right? It's enabling them to do their jobs faster, which in turn allows us as Century to continue to grow, adding more business while not increasing headcount necessarily, right? So we can, in the long run, we're reducing our cost to serve and really enabling our people to be able to do more valuable work.
And you mentioned you're a mountain bike racer. What lessons from mountain biking do you bring into managing supply chain chaos, if any?
From the technology standpoint and and the business side of things, when I think about racing and the planning that goes into it, right? So, like, I get to a race and I've spent months planning, training, working with my coach to make sure I'm doing the right things, to make sure I'm using the time the best way, right? And so when you think about it from a business perspective, from a supply chain perspective, there's so many things that you could be touching and doing. But if you don't have a plan or a goal of what you're trying to achieve specifically, yeah, you can keep busy all day, right? Like, I could go out and do the wrong training stuff all day long and, be like, oh yeah, I got 8 hours of training in this week, right? But if it's not focused on the type of race I'm doing, for example, right? Like, is this a short track race? Is this a, endurance 5 hour race? Very different training for that. And same when it comes to supply chain. Like, what problem are we trying to solve? How much time do we want to allocate to it, and what resources do we want to allocate to it, right? Like, so being able to understand, and I think there's so many times in business where, like, you don't really get the clear goal of what's trying to be achieved, and you don't communicate that to the group. And so then you end up with folks that might be working on different interpretations of that goal, right? So for me, from the racing standpoint, I know what that goal is. And now I've got a coach that's going to help me to be able to make the right decision. So I don't have to think about it. And that'll bring it right back, right? So for me, I just get up and I look at my training schedule and I do what my coach tells me to do. And I meet with them once a month and we go through and we analyze everything. That's what Century does for our customers, right? So we sit with our customers, we work with them to understand their goals, their plans. We meet with them to update what's happening, but then we take that work and we define, okay, here's what needs to be done to get you, whether it's implementing a new customer, implementing a new program, changing something in their supply chain, right? Like our teams, our supply chain experts will do that work to get them to that finish line. And they can focus on what's most important to them, which is satisfying their customers, making sure they've got the right product to sell instead of doing all of this work, right? And so it's the same for me as a mountain biker. I don't have to think about like the periodization, the training, all of those kind of things. My coach does that for me and brings it to me. Century does that for our customers.
Okay, nice. And what are you seeing on the horizon in supply chain that others might be missing?
So when you think about modernization of supply chain, we're seeing a lot of customers modernizing their technologies that they're using. The one piece that I think gets left out so often, and I'm constantly trying to challenge on it, is the data integration layer. And so today, so many customers are still focused on EDI transactions, document formats that were built 20 plus years ago, right?
Mm.
And the point is, and from Century side as well, like we want to implement a new customer as fast as possible, right? And the customer wants to get implemented as fast as possible. But I think we lose a real opportunity there at times because we're not taking the time to redesign how we talk to each other. We've got some really forward-looking companies that we've onboarded in the last couple of years where they've actually built with us a separate API layer. So a separate way to talk between our systems and their systems. And so if they need to upgrade their TMS, their WMS, their ERP, it doesn't impact anything that we're doing because we have this separate layer that we can talk about, right? And so in the old style of EDI integrations with all of their systems directly, if they do want to do an upgrade, they now have to go out to all their partners like Century and say, okay, we're going to do a major upgrade of our ERP system next year. We need you to schedule all this time to go through these integrations with us, right? And so it creates a lot of extra risk. And so I feel like that's one area where, as supply chain professionals, we really need to take that time to recognize that these data integrations need to be modernized with the rest of the system, because that's the critical point. Being able to flow this data in real time at really kind of almost topic-based, segments of data just allows so much more power and speed. So I think that's one thing that we're seeing. Just on the note on there's been some discussions around additional charges for Chinese vessels, whether they're flagged or owned or built, coming into the ports. If that materializes, I think that could have a big impact on ocean freight costs because of capacity constraints that may materialize, and also on drayage and port throughput if carriers begin calling less ports in the US because of that, right? So I think that is something that we need to be on the lookout for as a potential chaos.
Okay, cool, good. And if a young supply chain leader is listening to this and wants to future-proof their career, what do you think they should focus on today?
Yeah, so I think certainly the technology is important. So understanding what technologies are available to you, right? Whether you're on the service provider side or the customer side of the equation, understanding those technologies is extremely valuable, extremely important. Continually evaluating, the partners that you're working with to make sure that they are advancing their technologies as well, right? You need to make sure that if you're reliant on them, that they're moving things forward. From a training aspect, or not so much a training aspect, but an engagement aspect. I do think, a lot of the conferences that are out there are valuable to attend to, really get a kind of concentrated evaluation of what's happening out there. So even if you just go for a day whether it's TPM or Manifest or some of these other logistics conferences, just to go through the expo hall and meet with people, maybe attend a few of the sessions, see the presenters. I think there's so much that you can learn because there's so many targeted solutions out there across the supply chain. You need to understand what's possible, but then you also need to recognize like, okay, do I need all of these technologies? Is there one company out there that can solve for a bunch of these for me? Because that's the other thing, like as a supply chain professional, you could just get so lost spinning in meetings trying to understand all of these things that are possible out there. The conferences give you that opportunity to see it in a concentrated time period.
Okay, cool. And network as well.
Absolutely.
If you could have left field question for you, Jim, if you could have any person or character, alive or dead, real or fictional, as a champion for AI powered supply chains, who would it be and why?
That's a great question. I'd almost have to say it'd be some superhero. I don't know, specifically which one, but I feel like,
We got to invent one. AI man.
yeah, I mean, at times, there's so much expected of a technology leader or, someone that's driving forward with AI, right? So like it's it's a combination of a whole bunch of different people, right? Because first off, you've got to have the ability to ingest information and understand technologies very, very quickly. You've got to be able to then translate that into the business and communicate to the business why this is important. And then to your earlier question, right now you have to deal with all of the challenges that come back to you of, okay, what about this? What about this? What about this? But then on the other side, you probably got a board or owner or something else that's like, why aren't you doing more in AI today? Right. And so you've got this balancing act that you have to do, and then you've got change management, right? So now you have to, okay, you find these technologies, you're ready to go with them. Now you've got to drive the change management across the organization to change how people work, and that is dramatically hard to do. So it is a superhero role. I just don't have one in mind that fits today.
Okay. Okay. Jim, we're coming towards the end of the podcast now. Is there any question I didn't ask that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
I think from the supply chain side, I've covered some great content there. Just one last note, I do have a book and a system out there in the world called Control Your Day. It is a solution or framework that I created about 12 or 13 years ago that uses the best practices from David Allen's book, Getting Things Done, and applies them in Microsoft Outlook to allow you to manage your tasks, your email, all of that inside of Outlook without having to go out to any external technologies. And so, yeah, published a book on Amazon, sold over 100,000 copies. I've created a Udemy course on it that teaches you how to set it up and how to use it. And I get emails, almost every day from someone around the world saying, "Hey, Jim, this just changed my world. Thank you very much." So, yeah, your listeners can go out to controlyourday.net and check that out. And, happy to ever answer any questions on that as well.
And apart from that, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
Yeah, so LinkedIn, probably the best place to go. So, just search for me on LinkedIn. You'll find me and connect with me there. And, happy to have a further conversation with folks.
Great. And I'll put those links as well in the show notes so everyone has access to them. Great.
Excellent.
Okay, Jim, that's been fantastic. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's been a great conversation.